Hey everybody, I'm Doug from Doug Does Tech, and today I am going to be deploying Defender for Identity into a new environment. It's 2024 October. Microsoft just did some updates to create some new PowerShell modules to help us deploy Defender for Identity. And so I wanted to put together a new video so that you all could see the latest and greatest of how to deploy that security product and get up and running of it. So if you're new to Defender for Identity, it's a great security product from Microsoft to help secure your on-prem Active Directory environment. And so I'll walk through like what it is first, and then I'll go through the installation directions and guidance on how to install it in your environment. And so stick around if you need to jump just to installation because you know what it is. Feel free. I'll put some links in the doobly-doo down below of linking over to just that video. So excited to have you here with me, and let's get into it. All right, so what is Defender for Identity? It is Microsoft's primary security tool for securing your on-prem Active Directory environment. So obviously a lot of orgs are moving to pure cloud only, but majority still are gonna have an Active Directory environment that they're gonna keep and stick around because they're gonna author identity in there, or they have large facilities that need a lot of the domain services feature sets that they can keep around. So not everybody's moving to cloud. Don't believe all the hype. So this is super important if you're using the Microsoft security stack then, because you still need to do the security on-prem. Because every attack may have a cloud element and they might start in the cloud, but almost all of them are at some point going to either pivot to on-prem to attack your Active Directory environment or something along those lines. And so really critical to have this as a option so that you can, help secure your on-prem Active Directory. Defender for Identity, the reason why it's called Defender for Identity is that the idea of it is that the identities of your users and servers are the thing that we need to secure inside of our environment, right? The idea that, hey, that single user is going to be the compromise. So this is kind of the take that it has, is treating all of those things in Active Directory as identities, and it's going to hunt down them to use this and help secure your environment, right? So it's going to look for unusual patterns. I've had it in my environment where, a user normally accesses 2 or 3 things, right? A printer, a file server, and two workstations. If we see them now pinning out and using 6 or 7 or 10, 15 devices, well, that's probably a sign of an issue. And this product will come in and detect that type of change behavior for the end user and bring it to the forefront so that you can see, yeah, we probably have a compromise. Someone's moving laterally. The security product has kind of 4 main things that it's using, or kind of cornerstone that it's built on. And it's going to be these ones here. So it's designed to prevent security by adding like additional security posture reports, detect, investigate, and respond. So it's kind of giving you these 4 options of how kind of it's built to come in and discover that. So on the prevention side, it's going to give you recommendations for your Active Directory environment. So you can come in and say, hey, yeah, Microsoft recommends turning off the print spools on our domain controllers. It's going to give you some recommendations like that. As well as on the user front, it'll come in and say, hey, these users have this ability, or maybe someone is doing, there's a way, like an attack pattern or a path that you could lead and compromise your Active Directory environment. Like a domain admin got used on a local workstation at an end user. And so if there's multiple paths to lead to compromise of that domain admin account, it'll show you that attack path. Kind of like a light bloodhound type solution there. So really cool features that it can do, provide you that additional security. The downside of some of this reports is that sometimes cleaning up these Active Directory gaps that have been in our environment for 15 years, it can be a whole project, but we're not going to get into that. We're just going to talk about what it provides you in there. Next, on the detect front, it's going to give you this is the bread and butter of the solution, right? Alerts based on attacks of your Active Directory environment. So it's going to come in and show you, hey, someone's doing this thing. It's been really purpose built for these threat detections in here, stuff that's very hard to detect in a security environment. It has been really it's been designed to catch these things. So pass the ticket, skeleton keys, stuff like that. And I've used it in my environment before. And when I had this set up for my pen test, it was great, right? I caught my pen tester, every step in the process that they were doing, from a password spray to a compromise of a domain admin or an admin account. It detected each of them in there. And so really great security tool to come in and see what's happening in that environment. Next, Respond. This is a pretty newer option that Microsoft did to the product. It lets you come into your Active Directory environment and from the security portal, disable users in Active Directory. And so that's a really nice feature set that you can take advantage of. It's new. So if you have like a team that's actually a cloud SOC, instead of having to open up like a ticket for you to come in and do that, the SOC can come in and just respond and disable that Active Directory threat directly into it. We used to not have that capability. And so this really makes a big difference on increasing that security of your environment. Additionally, they also added what they're calling automatic attack disruption. And so this is Microsoft's coming in and say, hey, you know what? If we are, I think the team told me it was like 200, 300% positive that this is a compromise and it's coming from like Defender for Identity, multiple security products saying, hey, this is a compromise, it'll automatically do that. It'll automatically contain that threat and disable those users in it. I had up the company with it a couple of weeks ago, and they were happy and annoyed because their pen testers got blocked from accessing their environment, and they had to go allow them back in to continue the pen test. But this came in and contained that thing automatically for them. And so really nice component, automatically blocking that stuff. So that's kind of the Respond option for you. And then Investigate, right? This is where it really helps, right? It's a part of the bigger chain of the Microsoft security stack. So it comes in and fits into the other things. So if attack starts with an email and goes to an endpoint and then goes back to Defender or Active Directory, you can see all of that chaining and it'll connect the dots from you. If you're investigating a security threat that was just in Microsoft Cloud and then pivoted to on-prem, you can use Defender for Cloud Apps to come in and do the Defender for Identity and see where the different attack patterns comes in and tie it in. So really helpful, kind of holistic approach to it. I got old product names in here, but that's okay. Holistic solution to come into this. So I really like the analogy that Matt Egan on the Microsoft Black Belt team told me, that essentially all of these different tools are like Voltron, the anime, right? Where each of them is their own robot, that is powerful in its own right to come in and secure your environment. But holistically, when you combine them all together, they become the super Voltron robot. And that's really the great way to think about all the Defender suites. Combining them all together gives you that, giant robot that's going to help really protect your environment. So that's what Defender for Identity is and what it does. Let's pivot over to what it takes to deploy it and get it up and running. All right, so here we are on our domain controller in our demo lab, ready to deploy Defender for Identity. So it's simple DC environment, super simple, one DC and one workstation on this right now. But the steps are going to be the same regardless of how big your forest is and how complicated your environment is. Couple things to note, 250 domain controllers by default, so hopefully you're less than that in there. If you have more than 250 DCs, open a support ticket with Microsoft and they'll get that extended so you can do more than that on your environment. Hopefully your environment's not that big and you're watching a YouTube video on this, but it is what it is. All right, so what do we need to do to deploy it? How do we deploy this safely in our environment? Well, the first step is actually under Identities, under Tools, there's a sizing tool that you're gonna wanna run in your environment. So this sizing tool from Defender is going to make sure your environment has all the prerequisites, or your domain controllers are really big enough to deploy the solution out and it's not gonna cause any performance hits on your DCs. Microsoft recommends at least 2 cores in your domain controllers and 6 gigs of RAM by default. So if you don't have that, you're gonna want to run this tool. And well, you should run it anyways just to see is there anything overperforming. So you just download the tool, and in my environment, it's already on my workstation. So you're just gonna come in here, open it, download it, and then you'll run it in your environment for, for 24 hours. So let this bake for 24 hours. And then essentially what it's going to do is it's going to give you an Excel spreadsheet with everything that your environment needs or changes it's going to recommend to your environment to come in and make that happen. So in here, it's going to output to essentially, here, I'll split up here. It's going to output for you an Excel spreadsheet like this one in here with the list of, hey, recommended changes. So like in my environment here, this other lab that I have, yes, this DC is good, this one needed 4 gigs of RAM and 1 core, right? And so you can come in and you'll see that data from it and see like what changes you need to do in your environment. So that's step 1 that I would really recommend running for your environment before you do the install. Come in and use that. So great component that you can do here. Second step for deployment is you need to start going into the environment and start setting it up. So to do so, security.microsoft.com, settings and identities. If you first time setting up or accessing the identity section, it'll come through and set up your environment for you the first time. You can see I already have another environment that I've deployed this to a couple times and testing other features for it. And so we're just going to add on to that today. If you get an error when you access this, it means you already have some Active Directory groups created from like a previous deployment or turn on that either Microsoft did or another employee did for your environment. So there's going to be 3 groups or 2 groups inside of Active Directory, or Azure Active Directory, I should say, or Entra ID, I should say. And you need to go ahead and delete those out of your environment. So let me just pull up here so you can see it. These are default groups that is used for like RBAC permission that you could do in here. And so it's just something that if they already exist in your environment, go in and remove them. So search for Azure, and then you can see here the Azure ATP user group. It might be 3 of them, it might be 2, depending on when your environment got created. But this you delete those accounts out of it, and then it'll clear it from your environment. And so then you can go back in, recreate it, and you'll be good to go. So that's step 2. All right, so we're gonna come into the Identities tab, turn it on and activate it. Step 3 for deployment is we need to make a service account that's gonna run this whole thing. It is a sensor package that you're gonna install on your DCs. That's how it does all of the collection of data from your environment. I kind of skipped over that in the overview section, but this is install that you put on each DC or each of your Active Directory domain controllers in your environment to help you come in and secure your environment. So think of it as almost like everything that does identity, you want this installed on. So let me come in here. This will make it a little more clear. Right, so from an installation perspective, right, we're going to put it on domain controllers, ADFS servers, Active Directory certificate servers, and Entra ID connector or AD Connect server. And it's going to sense everything that in these lists above and basically pull in and do the reports of it. So that's essentially what we're doing. We're installing a sensor on each one of them. But to do that, we need to have a service account, run it and set it up. And so for that, we're going to come into the identity portal and set some credentials in our environment for this. This group managed service account, or what I'm going to recommend you do, is a group managed service account for it. And this is going to run everything in your environment. So pretty easy to set up. And this is where under the Identity PowerShell tools, they have this MDI PowerShell module that is going to be fantastic for setting this procedures up. So let's go and look at what that would look like now for our environment. So I put together some PowerShell notes on here on how to deploy it in our environment. And in this case, we would just install the PowerShell module and run it in our environment. So I've already done this install here. And the next step would be to create a service account that we're going to use to run that sensor. This is going to be the solution that does it. And so in here, they have this set MDI configuration, I skipped a step. So let me do this one first. There we go. Did it out of order. So in here, they have this new MDI DSA account, which will create the account that you're going to use to do it. It's also, you can see here, I'm calling out a group that I'm going to use for it. A group, in this case, this is a group managed service account that I'm going to use to install this. A group managed service account is an account with no password for your environment. So it's very safe, but it uses a group in Active Directory to determine who can go get that password. It technically has a password, but it's managed by Active Directory and rotated on a standard schedule so that, if a hacker compromised a single device, he's not compromising it everywhere. It's automatically rotated around and managed by it. So you don't have a standing password that you need to remember to rotate. It's just handling it for you. And this group right here controls which machines in your environment can go get that in their environment. So we're going to go ahead and run that in our environment here. My domain controller is not liking me right now. So let's go ahead and reboot this thing and get it up and running. The downside of a demo lab is that I gave it like a gig of RAM. And so I'll run this in my environment and then we can look at essentially what it is doing in here. There it goes. All right, so that's going to go ahead and create this service account. Now, if you're curious like me about what's actually happening in the back end of this, you can come into the PowerShell gallery here and pull up exactly what that is doing in this environment. So when you used to deploy Defender for Identity, it was a lot more work because setting up the service account took a lot more steps to deploy it out and set it correctly in your environment. So this new PowerShell module does everything super easy for you in here. So in this case, what it's going to do is it's going to look at your environment and make sure your Active Directory is supported to doing all of using group managed service accounts. So a lot of environments don't have all the features turned on to do that. And so this is going to come in and set that up. So you can see here, it's creating a root key for your environment, and that's what's used for rotating it. So it's creating it if it doesn't exist. And so it's going to set up your Active Directory environment to support a GMSA. And so that's a great thing that it's handling for you. The other thing that it handles for you automatically is it's going to set up the domain controllers group as one of the items that's allowed to retrieve the passwords. So I mentioned before the GMSA can only be retrieved by passwords. And then in our command here, I'm creating a separate group for it. In these PowerShell modules, it's going to do both of that automatically for you. It's going to create this service account here. It's going to create a group that you can use. And then it's also going to set the domain controller group as a group that retrieves the password because it's assuming it's going to be deployed to your environment. So really nice component that it's going to do here and set up for you. The other and final thing that this is going to do in here is it's going to actually set all the permissions properly. So this was an often missed step in deployments that I would see with environments. This is going to go in and say, hey, do you have the recycle bin enabled in Active Directory? If you do, it's going to give itself permission to go read from that. So important for tracking, hey, those accounts have been deleted is being able to read into that. So it's going to give itself list content and read properties for that recycle bin. And these commands are old and hard to do, and it's hard to find the documentation on it. And so the fact that they did this all in here, really nice, really makes it easy. So that ran. So let's go and find what it created in our environment. So, and we're just going to go into Active Directory and search this up. Look at this. So created a service account, created a group. So what you need to do at this point is open up this group, and then anything beyond domain controllers that you're going to install it on, you want to add them as a member for your environment. So again, right, I mentioned earlier that Defender for Identity can be installed on domain controllers, ADFS, ADCS, and Enter ID. If you're installing it on those other environments, go ahead and add to this group that we created those servers. So you're going to just come in here, select that you want computer objects, and then you're going to search for, that machine. So I think it's just called demo. Yeah. So we would add that in here in this. You don't need to do it for your domain controllers because it already created a domain controller group and it's just piggybacking off the existing one. But this environment doesn't have more than that. So I'm going to add this one into it to do it. All right. So that's step 3. We create the service account that's going to be needed to run into it. And so that's fantastic there. One last step that's not necessarily always done by this script that it just can't do on its own is if you restrict login as a service in your environment, you need to tell that your domain controllers that this service account is already in here. So I see this a lot in environments that in the domain controller policy that they have in their GPOs, they have come in and that's a security best practice, so it makes sense. They've come in and restricted login as a service for their environment. And so that's great, right? If you do that, that's totally fine. But if you do restrict that login as a service, you need to come in and set up that account that it can access it. So you would just come into this and then, in our environment, we set this as the MDI service account here. So we just need to go in and, add that into this, right? So we're doing MDI, check name, right? SVC01, right? And then basically add that into the environment that it can do that. So if you've done that, check your environment, see if there's, you have login as a service restricted, and then add that GMSA account as something that can run in your environment. So now we're set, our service account has been created and is ready to run. And here you can see the output of it. It did need to create a root key for our environment and it then finished creating that service account in there. So great stuff, really nice, easy fix for running that PowerShell module in there. All right, now that that's created, we need to go back into our Azure portal and configure it. So in my case, again, I, MDI, what did I call the account? MDI SVC01. I'm going to program that in and then manage it as a group managed service account in there. And then my domain is demolab01.com, right? So again, program that in. And again, you can see here, it automatically hid the fact that there's a password. We don't need that because it's a group managed service account and we are now set here. So that is the domain controller, or that's the service account, set up in this environment. Step 2 for deployment is now coming in and setting up the necessary logging features that we're going to use for our environment for this. So any good security product needs logs, right? And so one of the steps of setting this up in your environment is making sure the logs are enabled and created in my environment. So in this case, we need to set that up. Usually it used to be like you'd go in and set up a bunch of group control GPOs and create them manually to do it. Again, Microsoft's PowerShell module for this made this easy. It's just done automatically for you in here. So this is the command I'm going to run in my environment, this set MDI configuration. And so let me just make sure this is working. Oh, I think that's the command. There we go. Typically, I would recommend running it with the create GPO disabled flag on this. But in my environment, I already know it's fine. So I'm just going to run it and turn it on here. And so what this is going to do is that it's going to go into your Active Directory and just set all the GPOs that you need for deployment in here and turn on everything else that we are doing in our environment. So makes life a ton easier because, again, there used to be a bunch of feature sets that we would need to go in, and it's a pretty detailed process for it. And so you missed a step, it would make it harder for you to get it done. But this is just going to go and do all of that for you as well. So again, very nice components for it. Now I can pull up group policy and see exactly those policies it created. And in my environment, I told it, hey, create the in the domain, configure all of them, and then put a prefix on each of them so that I know that why I created it. So MDI, Microsoft Defender for Identity, right? And here is the GPOs. Like it turned it on, and it has filtering built into it, so it would only affect like your CA servers or your the features that it needs to. It also aired out and said, hey, there's no Exchange servers in our environment, no ADFS servers in my environment. And so it's just, taking care of all of those features for me and activating it. So great feature in here. Turns on everything for me that I need to, does everything from the audit log perspective in here. You could do this manually again, but this just makes it easier to do. So that step is completed and we're ready to do the install. So you do each of these steps one time in the forest. And then in our environment in here, now on each of your domain controllers, you're going to do the install procedures. So inside of the security portal, once we have this account set up, we can go into sensors, add a sensor, and we can download the installation package and we can grab the access key for our environment. You need both of these to do the install for your environment in it. And of course I have that in here. I've already extracted it and I'm ready to go. Two components of the install that you're gonna need to do on each of your domain controllers, or I would recommend doing, is the npcaps installer and then the Azure ATP installer. They still have the legacy names of the product on here. And so, that's it, just it is what it is. So first step of the install npcap. npcap is basically the same tool that like Wireshark uses to monitor the network of your devices. And so just go ahead and install it. Don't make any changes to the environment for it. Just install it as is in here and pop it in, right? So just next, install it. It's important to do this first. If you do not do npcap first, it will use WinPcap. So the install file includes, for the Azure ATP sensor install, includes WinPcap. And that's not necessarily such a bad thing. It's just that WinPcap is no longer going to be supported by its own manufacturer. And so npcap is a better tool to use. Included in your licensing for Defender for Identity, Microsoft is paying npcap so that you can install it on your environment. So it's good to go here. If you already had npcap installed on your environment, you don't need to install this. It may give you an error if you're using a version beyond version 1.0. So if you're using like npcap 1.2 or 1.1, it may flush out an error inside of its reporting to say, hey, you're not using an npcap properly, or it's an unsupported version. But it should be fine for your deployments. So you saw easy deployment there, ready to go. After npcap is installed, install the Azure ATP sensor, right? So you're gonna come in, kick off that install, and that's essentially it for the deployment in here, right? Pretty simple, pretty light, pretty easy. One thing, if you are running on a VMware environment, you may get an error on install because VMware has like an offloading feature that they'll come in and do. So at this step here, it would tell you, hey, you're on VMware, fix this issue first. It's a setting inside of your NIC on your DC. You need to turn off TSO offloading. And that's fine to do. It's pretty easy. Obviously, if you're already keyed into it and you make a change to a NIC, it's gonna bounce you out and say, hey, you made a change to a NIC. And so just be aware if you're doing that, it's gonna happen in there. And so this step here, install, set it up, put in that access key, and you're gonna be done, right? And so that's the whole install procedure. That covers it up, and that'll make life easier for you. I got connectivity issues, so probably something I did wrong in my setup of my domain controller. It's probably too slow. I'm having network issues on this thing because I think I only got like a gig of RAM in it. So I probably need to update that but it'll come in and, set up, and it should work mostly in your environment. I didn't do the sizing thing properly, so I didn't fix it. So you're going to fix that before you do the install here. So that's this procedures here. I'm going to skip that. I'll come back in and show you it after I fix my environment in here. Last thing I did want to check, from an audit logging perspective, is now that we ran this set MDI configuration, there's one more setting that we do need to configure, and I'm not 100% certain the PowerShell module does it. So in the environment, you need to turn on advanced auditing for Active Directory. And so let's see if they did it. Oh, they did. So that's super cool. So the final thing that they created in the GPOs was turning on auditing for all of your environments. So when I ran that set MDI PowerShell module, I didn't realize they were doing this. This is super cool. They went in and set all of this stuff up here first for my environment. So that's great. It basically turns on auditing for users, groups, computers, group managed service accounts, and managed service accounts for your environment, and make sure, again, we have all of the auditing enabled that we need as a security product, as a security tool to help capture that. So cool features. That's the install portion of it. I hope this helps you out there. If you want to stick around to see like the results of what you're going to get out of the deployment, I'll do that next, but this is the installation portion of it. And so I hope this helps. I'll show you now exactly what you need to do or what you get out of the security product. All right, so our installation is complete. And so this is now up and running in our environment. To confirm everything's working great, what you're going to do is come into the security.microsoft settings and then sensors, and then you'll see your environment exactly where it is at and the status of it. In my case, I have 2 DCs and an Entra Connect server that is running, and they're all healthy in here. If you see things like service status starting or something like that, something went wrong in the group managed service account setup procedure. And if you see health statuses in here, that's just something that you need to fix from an alert perspective. You need to come in and look at those health issues on here, right? So in this case, if you saw unhealthy in here, go to health issues over here, and then you should be able to see exactly what's going wrong. And it'll give you like a robust list of like what's wrong with your environment in here, like directory service accounts are incorrect or something along that line. So if it's a sensor issue, it'll be here. If it's a global issue, it'll walk through like, hey, what needs to be happening in here? Directory service accounts are incorrect for the Doug S. Baker domain. That domain no longer exists. That's why it's airing out. So that's some good features there. You can definitely do that. Go ahead and set that up and look at that options there. Next, from a deployment perspective, a couple features that you should take advantage of is setting up sensitive accounts in your environment. So you can come into this and start tagging end users as sensitive or groups as sensitive. So think of all the stuff in your Active Directory environment that are you've done over years to give them extra permission. Like I have a help desk group, I have a domain admins group. You need to come in and tag like custom stuff like this. It already knows about, I tag domain admins here, but you don't need to tag domain admins. It already knows domain admins are in here. But if you do create like a level 1 service account or something like that, that would be a good one to come in and check to see like, hey, this has permission to all of our servers, right? That group is now sensitive. So go ahead and tag all those things and add it to it. You can also add a honey token for your environment and say, hey, if anybody uses this account, I want an alert on it. So you can do this as a canary account, like, hey, someone used the root administrator account and no one should be using that in our environment. So we'll tag that in this. Or maybe you have something like, a test user that if someone tried to log into it, you would want to know about it, like Johnny user or Jeff Leatherman or something like that. You can create and tag these things. When someone tries to log in that, you'll get an alert on it. So think of it as, hey, if someone starts password spraying every account in your environment, they'll password spray that account. They might not password spray the domain admin accounts because they're trying to be sneaky, but they'll password spray a random user in your environment. So that could be kind of a cool one to tag. Just create a user account for it, tag it as an option there. So that's kind of the main setup procedure for it. Of course, set up alerts and all of that kind of stuff. Go through the rest of the environment and you can kind of get that stuff. But what do you get after this happens in your environment once it's set up? Well, some cool things that you can take advantage of in here is going to be stuff like exposure management. So it's going to come in and give you recommendations on that, ways to increase your security for your environment. So I'm going to come into this and filter down just to the Defender for Identity recommendations on what we got on it. And so it's going to give us all of the recommendations on how to change stuff in your environment. Like I got print spoolers off, so I did that. It's good. But here you can see here I have, let's see what I need to fix in my environment. Dormant accounts in sensitive group. I got a bunch of domain controller or accounts that are no longer used in my environment that haven't been used in a while. So I have admin Zach isn't, is domain admin, but hasn't been used in a year, right? So that would be something that I would want to come in and remediate. And it'll walk through in here all of these different elements of, hey, this is something that is configured probably unsafely in your environment, right? This account has got 2 unsecure attributes in it, reversible encryption and, no password required, right? Just not a strong password in that environment. So great feature sets that you can take advantage of. Come into the recommendations and filter it down to the domain admin account or Defender for Identity, and then you'll be able to see some of this kind of great data on it. Next, you're going to get alerts, right? You're going to have alerts on your environment of things that are triggering for your environment. You'll notice in here, right, this is going to be that main security. So hopefully you're monitoring your alerts because, that's a big portion of the solution. It's going to give you alerts. In my environment, there's going to be stuff, or in your environment, there's going to be stuff that's fine to use or is part of your business, but it might alert on it. Like in my case, this is an alert from my Entra Connect server coming in and saying, hey, they're downloading and they're doing DC sync attack of our environment. And that's what Entra does, right? It downloads all of our user accounts and puts it into our Entra cloud environment. And yeah, it's recognizing that as an issue in here. So what you can do is, come in and make an exclusion from that, right? Set this up and say, hey, let's tune that alert out. To do that, you would come down here and do exclusions by either global exclusions or preferably by detection rule. So in my environment, I would come in and see that alert and say, hey, that type of alert is expected. Let's come in and let's add a exclusion for our environment for that purpose, right? This is a scanning server. It does that job. I expect that to do that. Or it does network reconnaissance. Maybe it's a security tool out there. Come into that single entry and exclude it for it. If you have something like a Nessus server or something that's doing a bunch of stuff and you need to set up a global exclusion, you can do that on here as well and just set it up and say, hey, yeah, that's fine that it does this, exclude it from everything. Preferably not doing that though, and you're gonna be good to go there. Next, so that's gonna be kind of the main stuff to do. Some of the other cool stuff that you're gonna see in here and be able to use is activity log. So in the cloud app section, you can see under activity log, it's a little bit of a misnomer here. You can look at what's happening in your Active Directory. So if I come into this security log and filter on Active Directory, I can see in here the robust log of what everybody did on-prem and where everybody's logging in. So I'm able to come into this and filter on, my DSB user account for this environment, and then pull up, essentially every step of, what this end user did, where they're logging in from, and all of that jazz in here. And so again, great tooling in here. I'll put some links in the doobly-doo down below the YouTube and show you exactly what is, all the links to all the things that I think are super helpful. But you are set if you stuck with me this entire time. I hope this helps and gives you some visibility into what you can take advantage of for Defender for Identity and how it can help your environment out there. So if there's questions, shoot them my way. If not, good luck and stay safe out there.